Audiobook Academy Biography presents Cecil Rhodes. Cecil Rhodes was a British South African businessman, statesman, and empire builder. He was born on July 5, 1853, in Bishop's Stortford, Hertfordshire, England, and died on March 26, 1902, in Muizenberg, Cape Colony, now South Africa. As Prime Minister of Cape Colony, 1890–96 and founder of De Beers Consolidated Mines, Limited. He was a major figure in the development of the world's largest diamond mine, 1888. The Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford were established in his testament, 1902. Early difficulties and financial achievements. Cecil Rhodes grew up in the countryside as the son of the vicar of Bishop's Stortford, where he always felt at home. Tree planting and agricultural improvement were among his lifelong loves, but his early aim was to become a barrister or a clergyman. After paying for the education of one son at Eton and another at Winchester, his father then sent all four of his sons into the military. As a result of Cecil's lung condition, he was kept at home and attended the local grammar school. He was also unable to pursue the professional career he had hoped for because of his poor health. His brother Herbert had already made a name for himself in the cotton farming industry in South Africa by the time he was sent there to work on a property in 1870. The farm in Natal did not succeed. Upon his arrival in Griqualand West, Rhodes discovered that his brother had already set out for the diamond fields. For a year, Herbert returned to his family's cotton field, but the diamond fever soon overtook him and his siblings. In 1871, they relocated to Kimberley, the mining capital of South Africa, where life was even more difficult than it was in Natal. Cecil, on the other hand, remained at Kimberley for a long time because of his trademark perseverance. He lived back and forth between Kimberley and Oxford for 8 years until he finally earned his degree in 1881. Regardless of how hard he tried, he was seen as an outsider in both groups. The younger students at Oxford were captivated by his strange mannerisms, falsetto chuckle, rambling monologues, and unusual background while he was at university. His imperialism had a mystical quality to it, as did his worldview. He went from being a speculative digger to a man of substance with big plans for the diamond industry's future during the course of his career. He created the De Beers Mining Company, 1880, with C.D. Rudd, an underprivileged young man who had acquired many of the De Beers mining claims that he had purchased. Success eventually attracted new friends and opponents. It was Alfred Bate, a German diamond expert, who was his closest confidant. De Beers mines were under Rhodes' authority after Bate helped him enlarge his claims. It wasn't until 1887 that he began his efforts to acquire the Kimberley Central Diamond Mining Company, which was largely controlled by Barney Barnato at the time. It all came down to Rhodes and Barnato agreeing to join their companies to become the De Beers Consolidated Mining, Limited in 1888. Barnato's company had many minor shareholders who were opposed to the merger and sued to stop it. The court sided with the shareholders, and the transaction was halted. Barnato and Rhodes, who owned the majority of Kimberley Central's stock at the time, liquidated the company to get around the verdict. Following the purchase of Kimberley by De Beers Consolidated Mines, Limited, the dissatisfied shareholders received a portion of that money. As more and more smaller diamond mines were taken over by De Beers Consolidated Mines, Limited, the company's share of global diamond output grew to 90% by 1891. In 1887, he founded the Goldfields of South Africa Company with a major share in the newly discovered Transvaal gold mines. These clauses were incorporated into the company articles, providing the main corporations of Rhodes the ability to raise money for growth into the north. Participation in African politics. Rhodes didn't see money-making as the ultimate goal. This man's dream included everything from painting the map red to recovering the American colonies for Britain's empire, as well as establishing a railway from Cape Town to Cairo. First, he entered politics in Cape Colony politics in 1881, running for the Cape Colony Parliament in a constituency that relied on the support of the Boers. In his hands he kept it all his life. Despite his lackluster public speaking skills and disdain for formal legislative procedure, his innovative ideas won him admiration. Many Boer politicians befriended him. He advocated for the rights of native Africans in what were then Basutoland and Bechuanaland, now Lesotho and Botswana, and he had his sights set on the northern frontier of South Africa. In 1882, he was sent to a commission to quiet Basutoland after a brief revolt, his first foray into native African policy. General Charles Gordon, a former British administrator of the Egyptian Sudan, was acting on behalf of the Cape government when he put down the uprising. Gordon had been able to achieve his goals without resorting to brute force. Although Rhodes was impressed by Gordon's character and methods, he was less pleased with his lack of regard for financial gain. In his desire to keep a north-south highway open, he became embroiled in numerous controversies. The Germans, Belgians, and Portuguese, as well as the Transvaal Boers, competed for Africa's unexplored interior. This is what he saw: the missionaries were unduly concerned with native African concerns, Cape Town's weak government was an imperial element, and Britain was too far away to appreciate what he was trying to say. The High Commissioner, Sir Hercules Robinson, was one of his most devoted cultivators in Cape Town, and it paid off handsomely. The missionaries' journey passed via Bechuanaland, which was critical. Originally, Rhodes hoped to utilize it to open up the northern regions of Mashonaland and Matabeleland, both of which are now in Zimbabwe, Rhodesia. Aspirations for mineral wealth, communication, and eventually white settlement were the goals of the explorer. However, many invasions had to be thwarted before the borders could be established. Stellaland and Goshen were declared independent republics by Transvaal Boers in an attempt to annex portions of Bechuanaland. The limits of Griqualand West were finally settled in 1882 by a boundary commission, to which Rhodes was once again appointed. Rhodes was able to persuade the commission to broaden its jurisdiction to include the two micronations. It was he who convinced the British High Commissioner to intervene when the Germans in Southwest Africa, now Namibia, declared a protectorate over two regions, which combined with Stellaland and Goshen would have cut off the Cape Colony from the north. The two republics were excluded from the Transvaal by the London Convention of 1884, and the government of the Cape undertook to help finance a protectorate over Bechuanaland in return. Withdrawal from Bechuanaland was also in jeopardy due to an anti-Boer deputy commissioner in the area. Rhodes was chosen in his place after he insisted on his dismissal. It took an invasion army from the Cape to force Paul Kruger to withdraw from his protectorate over Goshen after he had successfully reconciled the Boers of Stellaland. Rhodes and Kruger met for the first time in February 1885 at a meeting on the Vaal River. Their stubbornness and willingness to reference scripture meant that they could not come to an agreement on anything. Rhodes did not receive what he wanted, despite the fact that Kruger had to give up Goshen. The decision was made to make southern Bechuanaland a crown colony and northern Bechuanaland a protectorate. In March 1885, Rhodes resigned in protest and made a concerted effort to secure the transfer of the province to the Cape Colony, both in Cape Town and London. However, Rhodes was still hampered by two individuals. First and foremost, there was Kruger and his Africa for the Afrikaners, Boers, doctrine. British and other foreign workers in the Transvaal's gold mines were denied political rights by his 1890 franchise law. Mashonaland and Matabeleland were also under the hands of the Boers at the time. King Lobengula, the monarch of the Matabele, Ndebele tribe, was the second impediment in Rhodes' path. In 1887, he and many others had contacted him for a treaty and mining concessions. After he opened the door to the white men, Lobengula realized that he would never see them again. Rhodes' only trusted white men were missionaries, and he found one in John Moffat, the son of a famous missionary. Having convinced Lobengula to sign an exclusive friendship treaty with the Crown Colony of Bechuanaland through the efforts of Assistant Commissioner Moffat, Rhodes dispatched 3 of his trusted agents to get a mining concession under the terms of the contract. Lobengula finally agreed to the concession in October 1888. It seemed to him that the white man had only been able to dig a large hole in the end. The British South Africa Company, BSAC, sought a charter from the British government to develop the new region, but Rhodes had already signed away his kingdom in effect by pressing the High Commissioner. The charter was issued in October 1889, and Lobengula authorized the start of excavations. Imperialism and Rhodes's courtly response to the charge that he was a woman-hater piqued the interest of Queen Victoria. "How could I loathe the sex to which Her Majesty belongs?" Because of Lobengula's effective propaganda campaign, Britain issued a much broader charter than the one Lobengula had agreed to. As far as Rhodes was concerned, the chartered company's power would extend to northern Rhodesia, now Zambia, Nyasaland, now Malawi, and the Protectorate of Bechuanaland, now in Botswana. A dangerous march through Matabeleland and Mashonaland by Rhodes' pioneers began in 1890. In September of that year, they built a fort named Salisbury after British Prime Minister Lord Salisbury. A year later, Harry Johnston became the British government's commissioner in charge of Nyasaland, as well as an employee of the chartered business. Rhodes's influence was felt both north and south of the Zambezi River, and soon the new lands were referred to as his. Policies as Prime Minister. Meanwhile, He had returned to office in 1890 as Prime Minister of Cape Colony, the only position large enough for him. For a period of 5 years, he served as a Prime Minister who was both successful and creative. South Africa's future Prime Ministers will be housed there thanks to his gift of Rhodes, an old Dutch colonial home that he purchased and renovated in the style of the Dutch colonial era. While in South Africa, he lavishly entertained Dutch and British residents of the Cape Colony, as well as prominent guests of all nations. All of the projects he worked on were huge in scope. In Parliament, he managed to win over the Afrikaner Bond while retaining the respect of liberal British MPs. Effective and pragmatic agriculture policies were implemented by him. He had to be cautious when dealing with native African policy. His Voting Rights Act, 1892, was signed into law, limiting natives' right to vote based on their income and educational attainment. Rhodes referred to the Glen Grey Act of 1894 as a bill for Africa since it designated an area for African development. To put it another way, it was a way to maintain segregation of native Africans, further disenfranchise them, and limit their economic alternatives. To avoid a rift between the two countries over such policies was his primary objective. That posed a risk to him of mixing together the native question with the race question. As part of his northern policy, he also wanted to unite the Boers with the British. By alienating the Cape Dutch, Kruger's obstinacy made the situation more favorable. Kruger had constructed a railway to Delagoa Bay to eliminate the need for commercial traffic to travel through the Cape Colony in order to access the Transvaal. To prevent products from being transported by wagon in 1894, he shut down the Vaal River drits, or fords, and imposed severe charges on Cape produce. Rhodes attempted to protest in the capital of the Transvaal, but was unsuccessful. Kruger was forced to surrender only after Rhodes' Attorney General declared that he was in violation of the London Convention, and British Colonial Secretary Joseph Chamberlain threatened to launch a military expedition. The fact that Rhodes' health was unstable and that the Transvaal's gold reserves were vast compared to Mashonaland's proved to be a strain on his patience even earlier. His policy in the north was experiencing unanticipated difficulties. As a result, the company's resources were stretched to the limit. Rhodes' operatives were able to win some fresh territory for the corporation, but he was thwarted elsewhere. As a result of an Anglo-German agreement signed in 1889, Germany was cut off from the rest of Bechuanaland. King Leopold II of Belgium anticipated Rhodes' arrival by claiming Katanga for Belgium, 1890. However, he was unable to eradicate Portugal from Africa after the Anglo-Portuguese Convention was signed in 1891. Nyasaland's administration was hampered by Harry Johnston's obstinacy. To calm the pioneers in Rhodesia, Rhodes gave lavishly out of his own wallet on his first visit there in 1891. When Rhodes's close friend the BSAC administrator, Leander Starr Jameson, launched an invasion into Lebengila's Matabeleland on spurious pretexts in 1893, serious turmoil ensued. Shortly after Lebengila's defeat and subsequent death as a result of the short but sharp conflict, hordes of pioneers poured into Matabeleland. However, despite all his success, Rhodes could not bring Southern Africa closer together. He was becoming increasingly irritable and irritated as he grew older. As of 1895, he was resolute in his desire to avenge President Kruger's death. Uitlanders in the Transvaal had already been discussing the possibility of using force to address their problems. A national union led by Rhodes' brother Frank was created by the Uitlanders to promote their cause. Once again, Kruger stopped the Vaal drifts in 1895, enlisting Germany's help in the process. Again, he was compelled to retire, and this time a plot was afoot to get rid of him altogether. When Rhodes learned about it, he did everything he could to help it flourish. Jameson Raid. The strategy was known to Chamberlain, but no one could have predicted what would actually happen. The Johannesburg branch of the National Union decided to give up and not take action. It was widely believed by all parties involved, Rhodes in particular, that the idea had been abandoned, but Jameson acted rashly still and invaded the Transvaal on his own, forcing the Uitlanders' hand. On the 29th of December, 1895, he led the legendary raid. It was a complete disaster, with only a few of his troops being slain in the process. Resigning from practically all of his positions in the Cape administration and his chartered firm, Rhodes refused to denounce Jameson and was forced out of office. Rhodes suffered a near-total defeat in the raid. Rhodesia was taken over by the imperial government while Jameson was imprisoned. The Dutch and British colonials became further polarized, and Jameson was imprisoned for treason. He spent the remainder of his life encouraging growth in the north, and only the charter was saved. Even the general people began to feel sorry for him. The last few years of his life were filled with personal and political setbacks. There was a major uprising in Matabeleland early in 1896 when Rhodes was in England. Rhodes returned from Egypt, where he was instrumental in putting down the insurrection. It was only after organizing a peace conference that it came to an end. Rhodes discovered the view of the world in the Matopo Hills on that occasion and picked it as his final resting spot. In his final years, he was beset by an unpleasant romance with an aristocratic adventurer, Princess Radziwi, who attempted to influence Rhodes, Sir Alfred Milner, the High Commissioner in South Africa, and even Lord Salisbury to promote her notions of the British Empire. In Rhodes's case, the young bachelors he was surrounded by could not protect him from a devious woman. She fabricated letters of credit and bills of exchange in his name before being arrested and sentenced to prison. While in Europe in 1901, he was summoned back to Cape Town for the trial of her. On his return, his final political move was to support Milner in suspending the colony's constitution until the October 1899 outbreak of the South African War was ended. However, he was already nearing the end of his life due to an untreatable form of heart illness. He perished before the conflict or before the trial of Princess Radziwi had ended. The train ride to the Matopo Hills, his final resting place in Africa, was a triumphant procession. Legacy. He and his BSAC profoundly altered the landscape of southern Africa, as well as its people's lives. But in doing so, he ignored the rights of the natives, as he referred to them, who had already established themselves on the property. Many of Rhodes' agreements with African chiefs were of questionable legality, and he frequently pushed or ignored established boundaries with other European colonial powers, putting him at war with the Foreign Office of the United Kingdom on a number of occasions. Some of the laws implemented during his time as Cape Town's premier laid the foundation for South Africa's discriminatory apartheid regime. During the reading of Rhodes' last will and testament in April of 1902, a different kind of legacy was revealed, a creative plan for offering scholarships to Oxford to young men from the colonies, the US, and Germany. Imperialism that was less self-serving appealed to the public. The majority of his wealth went toward scholarships. Many non-white students have benefited from the scholarships, though it is dubious that this was Rhodes's intention, given the will forbids exclusion on the basis of race. He originally stated that equal rights for every white man south of the Zambezi was his policy, but then changed it to civilized after liberal pressure. But he may have thought that civilization and civilization were synonyms because he considered the idea of native Africans becoming civilized to be so remote. Thank you for listening in Audiobook Academy. Don't forget to subscribe and smash that like button for more content like this. See you in next video.